Hey, hi, howdy, hello, and welcome to another reaction video. Today I'm watching a video from the Cozy Corner, which is Blarg's third channel, maybe? You get the idea. It's, educational content. Ooh. Sorry, I'm adjusting. There we go. I think that's a little better. Anyway. Today, it's the deadly poison marketed as a miracle cure, talking about radium and its prevalence throughout American history. If you've seen this video, you may have noticed a comment that I left a while back when it was first released. I never actually ended up watching the video. I kind of got busy and got distracted, but I'm here now, There was a stage play talking about the Radium Girls, and I performed in that in high school. It's a very interesting little bit of history. Let's get into it and see what it's all about,
And welcome back to the channel. I'm going to start with two things quickly before we get into this video. Number one, today we are going to talk about some pretty gruesome I'm not gonna lie. So I would probably avoid eating to this one, especially like smoked meat. That's probably a big no-no for today. And number two, because this
I had barbecue
inappropriate to do at any other
like yesterday.
in this video, make sure you guys go to
very topical
gamersub.gg and use code BLARG or code COZY for 10% off anything on the website. Thank you so much to GamerSubs for supporting the channel. Also, you guys
go check out GamerSubs.
Glasses today.
Oh,
they are
wow.
not informative. They actually help. So I'm sorry for the glare. I know that that's probably going to be annoying, but on the bright side, I can now read, which is big. Okay, now that we are all done with that, I'm going to tell you guys a story of one of the most disturbing examples of corporate greed and negligence in modern history. One that directly claimed the lives of 31 women and left countless others permanently scarred, disfigured, and sick. First, though, we'll have to go back to the year 1898. Just 4 days before Christmas, in an unheated, leaky, cold shed in Paris, a 31-year-old
Sounds about right.
and a 39-year-old Pierre Curie were spending their cold winter night studying an ore known as pitchblende, a highly radioactive uranium-rich mineral. This was absolutely
I've heard that name before,
as they seem to have some sort of fascination for this uranium ore. According to some sources, they actually processed over 8 tons of pitchblende between 1898 and 1902. Unaware of its potential dangers, they used to grind it by hand, breathe it in, and even keep it in their pockets as they went about their daily routines, thinking that the only side effect they were getting from this was the slight burns from handling it for too long. It was well documented at this point that uranium had tons of practical uses, but they had a feeling that this pitchblende had something more to give. And they were right. It was on that cold winter night that they discovered radium. The discovery of radium spread like wildfire, and the public was absolutely fascinated with this seemingly magical substance. It emitted heat, it would glow in the dark, and it gave off massive amounts of energy without using any sort of fuel. In hindsight, the list of products that included radium is quite shocking. We have to remember that in the early 1900s,
God, I love drinking heavy metals in my water.
Known about radioactivity. Radium was added to medicine, toothpaste, cosmetics such as makeup and face creams. It was added to drinking water, chocolate, and even sold as a tonic to promote health called Radithor. In the early 1900s, radium was one of the most expensive elements on the entire planet. So naturally, people labeled it as luxurious and exotic. But here's the issue with radium. It's really toxic. It's really
bad for you.
Is called radon gas. As you can probably imagine, a radioactive gas is bad. When radium or radon gas is ingested or breathed in, luckily for us, 80% of it is removed from the body via shit from a butt. But the other 20% has an awesome little feature. Your body
gets caught in your bones.
Radium the same way it does calcium. As we've been told since we were children, calcium makes for nice strong bones. You know what doesn't make for nice strong bones? Radium. So once your body deposits radium into your bones, it wreaks havoc on your bone marrow and bone cells. But don't worry, that's not quite all. Radon gas also emits alpha particles as
it's
well
also
as gamma
radioactive.
radiation. So it also has the risk of destroying and mutating your soft tissue cells. For those who might be a little more fluent in radioactive decay, you might be thinking to yourself, well, alpha particles aren't really that bad because they can't typically penetrate skin cells.
But it's gamma
yes, that
particles.
would be fantastic if it weren't for the fact that they were literally turning it into tonics and drinking it. Radium is so toxic that not only did it contribute to the leukemia that took Mary Curie's life in 1934, but it's so dangerous that even today, her notebooks are still so radioactive that they are kept in lead-lined boxes in Paris. With a half-life of 1600 years, it's quite unlikely that these notebooks will be removed from their lead-lined sarcophaguses anytime soon. Is it sarcophaguses or
sarcophagi sounds better.
Skip ahead to World War I. Not much more is known about radiation, but radium is in full production. Scientists learned that when you mix radium with zinc sulfide, it produces a glow-in-the-dark effect. This was an absolute breakthrough for military and industrial technology.
Use it to paint watch faces for soldiers in the trenches so they could see
clocks, military instruments, as well as airplane cockpits. Following the war, it was far more common to have women in the workplace. Their generally smaller hands, as well as their higher attention to detail, made them the absolute perfect candidates to add this glow-in-the-dark paint to watch faces. Factories hired
that's where we get the Radium
hundreds of
girls.
these young women. Even some children as young as 11 years old were hired to paint these watch dials. Being a dial painter was actually seen as a prestigious job back in the day. It paid way higher than any other sort of factory or secretary job that were available to women at the time. But it didn't take long before these dial painters were given a strange nickname. People noticed that these women had a strange glow. Their hair, skin, and clothes would emit a similar glow that the watch faces they were
because they were covered in all of the dust and particulates.
Ghost girls. Which, you know, in hindsight, kind of a fucked up nickname.
Yeah.
Is what happens to a woman, but we'll get there. Some women would even embrace this strange phenomenon, wearing their nicest dresses to work so that when they went out dancing after their shift, they would emit this sort of shimmering glow. Even worse than that, some of them would paint their eyelids, lips, and teeth as some sort of fun joke or way to stand out with their friends. It wasn't long though before something odd had happened to one of these ghost girls. It all started with a young woman named Amélie Magia, or known by her friends and family as Molly. Molly was an early adapter to this new booming industry. She heard about this new magic element and thought about the prosperity it could bring herself and her family. She was hired alongside hundreds of other women to work at United States Radium Corp plant in Orange, New Jersey. The plant paid nearly 3 times what other factories would offer, and these women were assured by management and ownership that the radium was safe.
Perfectly safe.
And why would they think any differently? Because at this point, radium was still being advertised as something that is healthy and will keep you looking young. So to them, this seemed like a dream job. But what Molly and the others didn't know is that they had just signed their death warrants. With every single stroke of the brush, she unknowingly inhaled and ingested tiny radioactive particles straight into her body. Just handling radium unprotected is bad enough. But the problem was multiplied exponentially when the dial painters were taught a little trick to get their brushes to a more fine point. They were
put it into your lips to
lip dip paint. They would roll the brush tip between their lips to get it to a fine point. Then they would dip it in the radium-based paint, and then they would paint the watch dial. This was done every single time they needed to add more paint to their brush. Each time the dial painters did this, trace amounts of radium would enter their body through their mouth. The first warning sign came to Molly in the early 1920s. Molly had noticed that she was getting persistent toothaches. She visited her dentist, who removed the offending tooth and sent her on her way thinking that it would heal up as well. This though wasn't exactly
but it wasn't
a
a tooth.
red flag. I mean, it was the early 1920s.
It was so much
Dental
worse.
hygiene wasn't exactly the most studied and mainstream thing in the world yet, so something like a toothache wasn't exactly uncommon. But there was a problem. Days passed, then weeks passed. The socket where her tooth was removed stayed wide open and unhealed. Along with the pain of living with an open wound in her mouth that refused to heal, Molly started to notice that her other teeth began to ache just like the one they removed did. Again, she would return to the same dentist to have those offending teeth removed, hoping that this would solve the problem. But each time she went in, she left with more problems than she got there with. Her wounds absolutely refused to heal. The inflammation has spread throughout her jaw, and she had shooting pain all the way around her face. But what Molly and
I
her
couldn't
dentist
imagine.
didn't
That
know
sounds like
is
hell.
that this really had nothing to do with her dental health. They were just the first signs of smoke that the entire jawbone itself was starting to die. We briefly discussed it earlier, but to fully understand why her jawbone was dying, we need to discuss how radium affects our body. As I said before, radium behaves very similar to calcium, which, in case you weren't aware, is the most abundant mineral in the human body. And as we know, it is absolutely essential for maintaining healthy bones and teeth. When Molly would put the contaminated brush to her lips, her body would deposit the radium into her jawbones, her hip bones, her spine, her ribs, and all her other bones, just like your body would with calcium. Once your body has deposited the radium, it becomes part of the very fabric that makes up your bones, meaning that it's not just going to disappear or be expelled someday. Like we stated earlier, alpha particles from radioactive decay can't penetrate skin. However, when the very source of it is coming from within your body, you're kind of it bombards your body with radiation day after day, year after year. The radiation damages every single part of the bone. And
radiation
the blood vessels,
is
the bone marrow, the osteoblasts
scary.
and the osteoclasts, which produce and remove bone cells respectively. The cells die faster than the body can replace them, which leads to the bones becoming necrotic. Necrotic
And starting to decay while you're still alive. Yeah, that's awful.
Become more common, healing slows significantly or stops outright. Many x-rays of these ghost girls show abnormal bone growth, bone damage throughout their entire body, and in some places even having massive holes in their bones. In Molly's case, she was the very first person to develop something that has been aptly named radium jaw, or if you want to go the scientific name, osteonecrosis. The living bone that should have supported her teeth gradually became dead tissue. And here is another quick reminder that if you are eating, now is probably a great time to put the old fork down for a few minutes. Infections would develop deep inside this rotting bone. Pus would accumulate, and allegedly, the smell was so bad that doctors and nurses that would enter the room would actually gag. For Molly, eating had become impossible, talking was extremely difficult, and even moving her jaw led to excruciating pain. Doctors who examined Molly, as well as cases similar to Molly, reported being able to see jawbone visible through gums. As the infection spread, larger parts of flesh had become detached from the dying bone. It was reported by physicians that you could literally stick your hand in and pull out pieces of bone from their mouth. Her jaw at this point had essentially turned into one of those videos you see of like pit masters pulling out the bone at the end of like a 13-hour smoke on a pig butt. Sorry, that was like a really gross example, but I feel like it was the most accurate thing I could think of. The craziest part about all of this is that somehow nobody had
shouldn't have made me laugh so much
to her workplace or radium. Physicians were uncertain of the cause, and of course all the owners and management of these factories denied that there was any possible way that these extreme health conditions could come from their radium.
Yeah, why would they? They were fucking putting radium in their cocaine and snorting it.
From a massive hemorrhage. I'm trying to keep this video as light as I can given the extremely disturbing topic we're talking about.
But yeah, it is a very serious topic.
Extremely difficult when they labeled the official reason for Molly's death was syphilis. Jaw fell off here, and their first thought was like,
damn, must have been a hoe or
an STI. Like, I get that late stage syphilis is not a good sight. And I can kind of understand how they drew that conclusion, but it seems like an absolute massive injustice to Molly as well as all the other women who are suffering at this point to not even look into the workplace or the substance that they were putting into their mouth day in and day out for 8 hours a day. Another thing is, there's a sneaking suspicion that these corporations may have actually known how dangerous radium was. It's reported that the male scientists, chemists, and lab workers that handled the radium worked in far safer environments, using things like lead screens, using tongs when handling radioactive substances, wearing proper PPE, and having ventilation.
Something average corporation behavior.
Like it was a sweet little treat. Cut to a few years after Molly's death, and not a lot has changed other than the body count. Women were dying, Or worse yet, women were still alive, suffering from the same side effects that Molly had. There were stories of jaws disintegrating, teeth falling out, and breaking bones doing simple things like dancing or walking. But factories were still refusing to admit that their magic substance might be causing all of this damage. That was until one fateful day. You can probably see where this is going. The chief chemist at United States Radium Corp, Dr. Edwin E. Lemon, had passed away from similar side effects that Molly and hundreds of these other women who handled this substance had dealt with. It was his death, as well as the mounting death toll from dial painters, that finally pushed for an official inquiry as to what was causing all of this. The inquiry was headed by a Dr. Harrison S. Martlin. Dr. Martlin had began to examine patients who were still alive as well as those who have passed away. His goal was to develop techniques.
It's a good place to start, try to figure out commonalities
that might be lurking in their bodies. Lucky enough, he was actually able to do it. This was irrefutable proof that radium was killing workers from the inside out. With this scientific proof, it was only a matter of time before these corporations' lies and deceit was exposed to the public. The first of these came in 1925 in the form of a lawsuit against United States Radium Corp by a Marlet Carlo, a former employee. Her sister had unfortunately already perished from the side effects of handling radium, so she was not willing to go down without a fight. Whether it was out of bravery or pure desperation, she did something that no one else was willing to do by this point. She was ready to legally challenge these massive corporations to prove that radium was not harmless. After a very long battle, she was able to settle out of court for a measly $13,000 or about $250,000 in today's money. The problem is the justice system wasn't really prepared to handle these slow motion disasters. Because these symptoms took potentially years to manifest, they essentially had run out of time to legally blame a company that they worked for a decade ago. But in 1927, the most famous of all these lawsuits had begun. After trying to find a lawyer for up to 2 years who would actually go to bat against these massive corporations, Grace Fryer had finally found one by the name of Raymond.
Hello, Miss Fryer. I know you.
On behalf of 5 dying women: Grace Fryer, Edna Hussman, Catherine Schaub, Quinta McDonald, and Albina Laris. Each of these 5 brave women demanded $250,000, or about $5 million in today's money, for the medical expenses, pain, and suffering that they had endured. And I personally think that they deserved every single penny of that.
Yes, absolutely.
Due to the severity of the lawsuit, newspapers quickly picked it up and referred to the case as the case of 5 women doomed to die. Not exactly the most creative title, but it gets the point across, I guess. By the time the first hearing...
In the play, I played as one of the reporters who was covering the whole situation. Very interesting.
Had finally happened. 2 of the women were already bedridden, and the 3 others could barely walk. They had all mostly lost their teeth. Grace Fryer had to have a steel back brace, and allegedly all 5 of them were too weak to even raise their hands when taking the oath. I know what you're probably thinking. Wow, that corporation, they sure did sound evil. I bet they probably tried to delay the court hearings as much as possible, hoping that the woman would die before a verdict could be reached. You're absolutely right, they did. But despite their deteriorating health, these women were absolutely in it for the long haul. United States Radium had, of course, continued to deny responsibility. They argued that the illnesses were not caused by radium, and that the woman had waited too long to press charges, and the statute of limitations had expired. But Big Boss Boy Barry was absolutely not having that excuse. He argued that there's no way they could have filed earlier. A, because symptoms take a very long time to manifest, and B, they were misled as to what was even causing those symptoms.
Also true.
With increased scientific research coming from Martlin, as well as lots of public backlash, the company was forced to provide a settlement. The woman walked away with a measly $10,000 lump sum, as well as having their medical expenses covered for life, which to me is kind of bullshit. Because, like,
total bullshit. It's really fucking...
see that these women were not going to live long, so like... the rest of their life expenses may have been like 2 fucking weeks. They were also given lifetime payments of $600 a year that were paid out in weekly installments. Again, a very underwhelming and, to me, borderline offensive amount of money to pay people who
Genuinely,
you
yeah.
essentially killed. Unfortunately, all 5 women did pass away after the case concluded, with the longest of them lasting for 5 more years. It's truly difficult to know how many women died because of United States Radium Corp. Many cases were undocumented, undermined, or flat out covered up in order to minimize financial losses. There were thousands of women that worked in these factories, and their lives were forever changed by an invisible threat that was allowed to go on for far too long because of a society that pushes profits over people. Luckily for the rest of us though, these women left a lasting impact outside of the courtroom. They helped establish that companies could and should be held accountable for workplace diseases even years after exposure. Their suffering helped establish tighter workplace regulation, industrial hygiene standards, and helped grow the field of occupational medicine. Although OSHA wouldn't be created until the 1970s, the Radium Girls were widely regarded as one of the earliest and most important milestones in a long chain of events that led to modern workplace safety laws. Their fight helped establish that workplaces have a responsibility to protect their employees from hazardous materials as well as providing a safe workplace. A lot of the workplace protections that we take for granted would not exist without their refusal to accept that nothing was wrong. Life is really fucking hard for the best of us, let alone being a woman in the 1920s. They hoped for a better life and a purpose outside of servitude to their husbands. Rather than prosperity, they were met with the ugly face of unchecked capitalism. Their bodies lie today in lead-lined caskets, still highly radioactive. Tokens of proof left behind that shows what happens to other human beings when we put ourselves and our desires over the care of others. Thank you guys so much for watching the video. I hope you enjoyed it, and I will see you in the next one.
So, yeah, it's a very interesting bit of history. Has a lot of meaning and relevance for the future. Even now, to this day, I think. Thank you all for watching. I hope you enjoyed, hope you learned something. Moral of the story, fuck the United States Radium Corporation, and anybody who knowingly and willingly continues to throw people into dangerous situations without telling them that they are in danger. I hope you enjoyed. I'll see you all again later. Bye for now.